Stacey Abrams is the CEO of Fair Fight Action and currently leading and winning the fight to flip Georgia blue. Stacey Abrams, welcome back to Pod Save America.
Thank you for having me. Again,
always. Before we get into the interview, I want to give you the opportunity to say I told you so, because back last year when Crooked Media was putting forward our Adopt a State program, we picked the 6 states that we thought were most likely to flip from red to blue. Georgia was not one of those states. You told us we were wrong. You made a very compelling case. We did not add Georgia. We did do some volunteer work in Georgia, but we did not add Georgia. But you were right. We were wrong. So I lay myself on the mercy of the court.
I will take the high road of Sheldon Cooper and say, not I told you so, but I informed you thusly. I informed you thusly.
Yes. Well done. Well done. Well, let's talk about Georgia and what happened in this election season. What do you think the key was to flipping Georgia from red to blue? What was the work that was done? What are the lessons we can learn from that?
Number one, that this took time. I started traveling the country in 2011 with a 21-page PowerPoint deck that was my growth strategy for Georgia from 2011 to 2020. Actually, it's at 2010 to 2020, because we had to go from a nadir to being blue. And a big part of what I would tell people is, look, I'm not going to be able to deliver successes every single cycle, but we can make progress. But we also had to think about all of the other groups that have been toiling and working for years, but never had the investment to come to scale or to sustain their efforts in between elections. And so a big part of what I've been working on for the last decade is bringing those resources to Georgia. And Vote Save America was incredibly helpful, and Crooked Media, in making sure we were able to create this through line where the money kept coming so that you weren't in this feast or famine cycle that hit so many red states. We only get attention when we have an exciting race that someone else cares about, which means that the ability to build relationships, to build infrastructure is just incredibly tenuous. I've been privileged to be able to, raise money effectively. I'm a really good beggar. And so I've spent the last 10 years building up to this ability to invest. But I want to be very clear. This was a team effort that, culminated in this election, but it did not begin with this election or even with my gubernatorial election. My election in 2018, that campaign was about proving it. We wanted to win. We should have won. But the big piece was to demonstrate to the world this method of actually talking to every voter, engaging every community, not being driven by data to the sense that you are leaving people out, but using data to find those who need and want to be in. That's how you transform an electorate, and that's how you build the capacity to do victory after victory after victory. We're still working on the second and third one, but yes.
Right. Yes. Well, we're going to have an opportunity to try to get at least 2 and 3 pretty close. A huge part of Fair Fight, very focused on voter protection. That's been a huge part of what Fair Fight has done, what Crooked Media has worked with Fair Fight on. A big part of this is voter registration, something that is near and dear to your heart, is what the New Georgia project that you started has worked on for many, many years. It's how we got to this point. Can you talk a little bit about how, the amazing voter registration efforts in Georgia, and who were sort of the heroes of those efforts were?
We started voter registration in 2013 or 2014 at scale. And again, that's the difference. So you had groups like the People's Agenda, run by Helen Butler, who's been doing this work. You had groups that eventually became groups like GALEO, the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. They'd been doing the work. Asians American Advancing Justice, they merged with another group that had been on the ground doing the work. The issue was doing the work at scale and doing it again and again. And I want to be clear, the 800,000 number that is being used, that number is the number of people who registered after 2018. So that was not all attributable to any of these groups. There are people who registered simply because they went in to change their driver's licenses. But what matters is that these groups have been building relationships, because getting registered to vote is like getting a driver's license. But if no one teaches you how to drive and you can't get access to a car, it's irrelevant. And so what's so critical about these organizations is that they didn't just register voters. They got into relationship with voters, helped new voters understand this power, helped them navigate the challenges. Fair Fight came in as a part of building the infrastructure so they could actually get to the polls. But the groups that have been doing this voter registration, New Georgia Project, AAAJ, Mahinte Now, Galeo, and other groups, the People's Agenda, those are all groups that have been doing this work. They just finally had the ability to coalesce and for us to be able to scale that effort to meet this moment.
We're now looking at 2 runoffs in January with the determine control of the United States Senate. And so much of what we care about, whether Joe Biden has the ability to appoint the judges he wants to appoint, the cabinet he wants, pass the legislation that he ran on and so many Democrats ran on. How do you see those runoffs playing out? What are the things we need to do over the next couple of months to ensure we have the opportunity to win those, like Joe Biden had the opportunity to win Georgia?
So first, we have to reject the anachronistic notion that Democrats can't win runoffs in Georgia. The 2 that people use the most often, the 2 Senate races, White-Fowler in 92, Jim Martin in 2008. You have to remember, Democrats won the presidency both of those years, and in neither of those years were Georgia senators necessary for the achievement of their agendas. This is much more akin to 2017 and Doug Jones. This is about coalitions being built in the South to save the Senate, and we know that can work. We know it can work because Doug Jones was able to turn out 48% turnout. We know it can work because coalitions were built together to get this work done. And we have 2 extraordinary candidates. We have candidates who each have their own lanes, but who are compatible, who have a shared vision, and who are actually really good at this. And so Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock are the essential candidates that we need for this moment. They can talk about justice, they can talk about healthcare, and they do so with authenticity and credibility, but they need resources. So we created gasenate.com. That is that's the link that will let you contribute to both Ossoff and Warnock, but it also contributes to Fair Fight, because we also know that the Republicans have not given up on voter suppression. That's why you see the flailing around of David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, the 2 senators who called on their Republican Secretary of State to step down. They did it because it worked. We were able to thwart voter suppression in real, meaningful ways, and they aren't happy about it. And so we have to believe that they're going to come back and try to reinsert and reinstall those regimes that block voters. And so Fair Fight is going to remain ever more critical to protect the right to vote. So gasenate.com is the best way to contribute. The last thing I'll say is this: we need volunteers. We do not need the world moving to Georgia. Unless you already had plans to come and establish residency, what we really need the most of is to know who you are and that you're out there ready to be called on. But you've got a lot of campaigning to do, and we've got to build this up. But please, please, please do not make plans to come to Georgia just yet. This is a local election that has national implications, but we've got to do what we did before, which is start with the people, start on the ground, and build our way up. But we'd love your volunteers to sign up with us, and we will make sure that you get information about how to volunteer. Go to fairfight.com. We can take your information, and then we'll get you plugged in where we need you most.
In the recent history of American politics, has been that when Democrats have victories that are powered in large part by people of color, Republicans double and triple down on voter suppression. What are you in Fair Fight looking at for what the fights to come obviously in the Georgia runoff, but down the line as Republicans try to figure out how to reduce the political power of the people who put Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in office?
The way we were able to mitigate voter suppression in this election included getting clear rules about absentee balloting, allowing people to cure ballots when minor mistakes are made, but their votes would have been thrown out otherwise, making sure that Black and brown voters weren't disproportionately given provisional ballots, ensuring that we had enough polling places that were adequately resourced, ensuring that we had drop boxes because of the weaponization of the Postal Service, making sure that people understood what was on the ballot. Those are things that we invested in. We were also able to get legislative victories on exact match to really thwart the ability of the Secretary of State to limit who could register to vote. All of these things can be undone through legislation in January 2021. And so our mission is going to be to make sure that Republicans don't double down on the voter suppression that we were able to mitigate by restoring the changes, restoring the rules that we were able to change. I will also point out that we were able to help direct almost $30 million worth of resources to counties across the state. And I want to give a big shout out to the Center for Tech and Civic Life, and CSME, I think is the other organization, who really invested in nonpartisan building the election administration infrastructure. That has to continue. We cannot allow a calcification of what we've accomplished to turn into a retrenchment on voter suppression.
A lot of people are concerned about this hand recount or audit that's happening in Georgia. Can you explain a little bit what is going on there?
So Georgia was always going to have what's called a risk limiting audit to look at the new machines to make sure that they were working the way they were supposed to. Georgia law also allows for a recount. And they will also do what's called a recanvas, just to make sure that people voted where they said they voted. Typically, when these things happen, there is a nominal change in the votes. There will not be 14,057 new votes that suddenly spring up and make Donald Trump the victor. He lost. He lost Georgia. We won. He needs to accept it. But as someone who believes in the legal process, I say let them do it. Let them follow through the rules. Just we need to believe and understand it's not going to change the outcome. There is no harm in the rules being followed. Now, what is harmful is the misinformation that's being spewed by Republicans because they're intentionally trying to gin up their voters by claiming that fraud has happened. There has been no fraud. The Secretary of State says there's no fraud. The Lieutenant Governor says there's no fraud. These are the Republicans saying this. And so we can't allow the misinformation to swamp communities who suddenly believe that they can't be heard if they try to vote. So the process is fine. It's the misinformation and the rhetoric that's dangerous.
When we take a step back and look at the election all across the country, obviously the defeat of Donald Trump, the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is of historic importance, right? Donald Trump represented a unique threat to our democracy, our way of life, our ability to get out of this pandemic, everything. But for the Democratic Party, there was lower down the ballot, there were some very disturbing signs, some wins we thought we were going to have, we didn't have. We didn't flip Senate seats, as in states that Donald Trump won. What are sort of the broader lessons you take from the election writ large?
One, that Donald Trump is a unique cancer in our nation, and luckily enough of us believed that it needed to be excised, that we did. But we are a divided nation, and that was made manifest because of Donald Trump, but it wasn't created by Donald Trump. The real challenges about whether access to healthcare is a right or a privilege, that argument continues to rage. The real conversation about how we invest in our economy to help not only those who are wealthy get wealthier, but help those who are middle or lower working class actually gain access, those are real debates we're having in this nation. The question of justice being something that should be guaranteed, that's a real conversation. That is a real debate in our nation. And so we shouldn't be so sanguine that we think because we were able to get rid of this grotesque example of bad, that the bad doesn't continue in just more palatable forms. Our responsibility is not to read into this that we have to wholesale change who we are. We just have to do a better job of getting those who share our values to participate. We saw voter increase, yes, but we have more opportunity out there, and we've got to be intentional about cultivating that opportunity, not just during presidential elections, but we should start with city and county elections that are coming up next year. We have state ledge races that are going to be happening next year and in 22. Those are all opportunities to continue to move the pendulum in our direction, because if we stop pulling it, it's going to swing the other way, and we are going to be devastated by it.
The victory in Georgia and the success we did around the country were powered by millions of people who got involved in politics for the very first time after Donald Trump. And what would you say to people to help keep them involved, help the people who got involved because of Donald Trump stay involved now that he is on his way out?
And that was part of what I was saying before, which is Donald Trump is a symptom. He was not the disease. He was just the symptom on steroids and in Technicolor. We need you to stay involved, because what he was trying to do, they will do quietly through your school board. They will do quietly through your city council. When zoning laws are made that allow poor communities and communities of color to be saddled with chemical plants, that's Donald Trump on a local level. When there is a disinvestment in your local schools in the midst of COVID, that's Donald Trump at the local level. So we have to stop focusing on his now, fading example and focus on the real people who are making these choices. Because when we allied local elections, when we skip over those lines on the ballot. What we're saying is you have permission to be just like Donald Trump, only quieter. But the effect is just as devastating and just as permanent.
People, after the victory in Georgia, people have been tweeting everywhere about how Stacey Abrams should be in charge of the DNC, for the Democratic Party. I'm not going to ask about any of that. But what do you think the top 2 or 3 things the Democratic Party should do to take the success we had in Georgia and export it to states that are on the cusp of it? Texas, obviously, North Carolina, one that's been on the cusp of it for a very long time, South Carolina. How do we sort of build the sustainable, progressive infrastructure that you all have built in Georgia and other parts of the country?
So this is a shameless plug for my book, Our Time is Now, Power, Purpose, and the Fight for a Fair America. So the first half of the book, I talk about voter suppression and voter engagement. But the second half of the book is exactly that. We have a demographic revolution that is not destiny. It is opportunity. We have to, one, acknowledge that identity politics works for us. And it's this. When you say you can see someone's community and understand the challenges they face and that those challenges may be different than your own, that's identity politics. And that's why people vote. Number 2, we have to have sustainable, consistent investment that does not rely on political candidates coming in saying, we think your county or your state matters this year. There has to be consistent investment throughout, and it has to be year-round, and it has to be diffuse. I am proud of the work that we do at Fair Fight, but Fair Fight is not the only group doing good work. And so part of what we're doing in this runoff elections, we're moving money to other groups too that we know won't float high enough in the ether to get their own attention. So we're going to make sure they get the resources they need. And then number 3, we have to wash, rinse, and repeat. This is a process. This is not an event. We are all focused on, ding dong, the witch is dead in the White House. But the reality is we've had to do this again and again, election after election for a decade. It's going to take time. Patience is hard, but patience met with investment and with mission is how we get the change we need and how we make it as permanent as change can be in politics.
Stacey Abrams, thank you so much for being with us. Congratulations on everything you have done in Georgia. We very much look forward to working with you to win these 2 runoffs and continue to turn Georgia and the rest of this country blue. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.